It happened on Thanksgiving Day, the moment that changed everything. Ethan, my son-in-law, loved an audience. He loved attention, control, and those little jokes that made him feel like the smartest man in the room. The dining table was full that evening. My daughter Emily, my grandson Noah, and 2 neighbors who had dropped by for dessert. The smell of roasted turkey hung in the air, the sound of cutlery clinking against plates filling the silence between shallow conversations. And then Ethan looked at me, carving another slice of turkey with that smug grin he'd perfected over the years. "So, Daniel," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "if that job hunt of yours doesn't work out, don't worry. The garage is ready for you to move in." Laughter filled the room. Awkward, nervous, but laughter all the same. Even Emily smiled, that tight, polite smile she wore whenever her husband decided to be funny at my expense. And Noah, he laughed too, even though he had no idea what the joke meant. Children learn fast. They laugh when the grown-ups laugh, even when it's cruel. I smiled back, pretending not to care. But inside, something cold and steady began to form. They thought I was just the aging father, the failure who'd lost everything. The man who should be grateful to have a seat at their table. What they didn't know was that I already owned 15 hotels. As they passed around the mashed potatoes, my phone buzzed quietly under the napkin. A reminder flashed on the screen, an embargoed press release scheduled for tomorrow evening. The headline read, "Morris Hospitality Holdings acquires Riverton Hospitality Group in $10.6 million deal." That's my company. My deal, my secret. For 2 years, I'd kept it hidden. I drove a rented Honda, wore cheap department store shirts, and played the part of the man who'd fallen from grace. They pitied me. They laughed behind my back. But all the while, I was building something far bigger than any of them could imagine. Ethan kept talking, bragging about his new promotion, about how hard he worked to provide for his family. Emily nodded on cue, eyes flicking toward me with a mix of guilt and discomfort. Noah kicked his legs under the table, humming to himself, innocent to the storm of pride and humiliation swirling around the adults. I noticed everything, the tick of the kitchen clock, the scrape of forks, the smell of dry turkey and cranberry sauce. That's how loneliness feels when you're surrounded by people. It's not silence, it's noise you're no longer a part of. You know, I used to think if you explained yourself enough, people would understand. But explanations don't fix anything. They just give others more ammunition to judge you. I learned to stop explaining. I learned to show, then walk away. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're listening from. Because tonight, you're hearing how one joke at Thanksgiving cost me my dignity and how I got it back. When Ethan raised his glass to toast, I declined wine. I needed a clear head. "Just water," I said. He smirked. "Suit yourself, Daniel. To family, even the ones between jobs." Laughter again. I stayed quiet. I'd spent the last 2 years living quietly, hiding my success behind normal clothes and modest manners. What they didn't know was that in my briefcase back home, I had documents that told the truth. Signed contracts, wire transfers, title deeds. I had the proof of every late night, every deal I'd closed while they thought I was scraping by. If they'd ever looked closely, they'd have seen the embossed logo on my pen, the hotel key card I kept tucked behind my driver's license. But no one looked. They were too busy underestimating me, and that's exactly how I wanted it. 5 years ago, when my marriage ended, I walked away with nothing but a box of tools and a pickup truck. My ex-wife got everything else, the house, the savings, the business I built from scratch. I signed the papers without a fight. There's a point when you stop arguing and start rebuilding. 3 months later, I bought a small, failing roadside motel with what was left of my savings. 12 rooms, a flickering neon sign, and plumbing that barely worked. I fixed every pipe myself. I learned from YouTube tutorials, worked 14-hour days, slept in the manager's office, and lived on instant noodles. That was where it began. My first property. My first proof that I could still build something from the ground up. A year later, while replacing the lobby carpet, my old neighbor called me. "Daniel," she said gently, "I saw Emily's wedding announcement in the paper." She looked beautiful. The paper, not an invitation, Not a phone call, just ink on a page. I thanked her and kept working. The glue fumes burned my eyes, or maybe it wasn't the glue. 2 years after that, I got a text. No words, just a photo of a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The timestamp showed it was 4 months old. It was Noah, my first grandson, and no one had told me he existed. I sat on the edge of a motel bed, staring at that tiny face on my phone until the screen went black. Then I put the phone down and went back to painting. The walls needed 2 coats before check-in time. Each one of those moments, every disappointment, every rejection, became fuel. I learned new skills, studied hospitality management online, negotiated better vendor rates, and built relationships with investors. Slowly, the motel turned a profit. I bought another one, then another. By the time Thanksgiving came around again, I owned 15 properties. All of it under a holding company that no one knew belonged to me. People think revenge begins with anger, but it doesn't. It begins with clarity. That night, when Ethan was still bragging about his company's Christmas bonus, I made a silent decision. I wouldn't defend myself anymore. I wouldn't try to prove my worth to anyone sitting at that table. I would let the truth do the talking when the time was right. When I left their house, I thanked Emily for dinner and stepped out into the cold air. From the window, I could hear them laughing again. Probably another joke at my expense. I unlocked the car. Not the rental I usually showed up in, but a black sedan registered under my company's fleet. I drove through the quiet streets until the city skyline came into view. The lights reflected on the glass tower ahead, the Grandview Plaza, my flagship hotel, my home. The night manager greeted me as I stepped into the marble lobby. "Good evening, Mr. Morris. How was your holiday?" "Enlightening," I said, and took the elevator up to the penthouse. Inside, the city stretched out beneath me. My briefcase sat on the table, still locked. Inside were the letters of intent, the share purchase agreements, the wire confirmations, all the proof I needed of who I'd become. Tomorrow evening, at exactly 6 p.m., the local news would break the story. Morris Hospitality Holdings completes acquisition of Riverton Hospitality Group. The entire region would know my name, and my family would finally realize that the man they pitied had outbuilt them all. I poured myself a coffee and looked out at the city lights. After years of being called a failure, I was finally free of needing anyone's approval. Let them laugh tonight. Tomorrow the world would laugh differently, and me. I'd be too busy running my empire to notice. 3 days later, my phone buzzed just after dawn. The name on the screen made me pause. Jennifer Walsh, senior partner at Hartwell & Associates. She was the corporate attorney managing my latest acquisition. "Mr. Morris," she said, brisk and professional, "congratulations. The final signatures have cleared. As of 9:12 this morning, you are officially the owner of Riverton Hospitality Group." I thanked her, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. That name, Riverton Hospitality Group, represented everything I'd been building toward. 15 hotels, including one particularly symbolic property that would change everything. But I didn't know that part yet. Not then. When I hung up, I poured another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The numbers looked surreal. 6 years earlier, I'd had $3,000 in my checking account. Now my portfolio showed an estimated market value of $10.6 million. And still, not a single person in my family had any idea. That afternoon, I met with my CFO, Patricia, a quiet woman in her 40s who never asked unnecessary questions. "You're running a tight ship," she said, sliding a report across the desk. "Riverton's books are solid, but I found something interesting in their property list." She pointed to one line near the bottom, Riverton Greens Country Club. At first, I barely glanced at it, but when she pulled up the photo of the ballroom, I froze. I recognized those chandeliers, the tall glass ones like icicles, glowing gold against cream walls. My daughter Emily had been married under those same chandeliers. The same ballroom I'd seen only from the outside, sitting in my truck in the parking lot, uninvited. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the image for a long time. And then I smiled, Poetic justice doesn't come easy. It has to be built, brick by brick, quietly, until it stands taller than your pain. I hadn't planned it, but now that the universe had handed me this twist, I knew exactly what to do with it. That evening, I called Patricia again. "Move up the closing announcement," I said. "Before the weekend?" she asked. "Yes. Make sure it runs during the Thanksgiving weekend news cycle. Friday evening, 6 o'clock sharp." She hesitated for a second. "That's a bold time slot, sir." "That's the point," I said. "People pay more attention when they're at home." After we hung up, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn photo, Emily at age 7, holding a wooden birdhouse we'd built together. She'd written for Dad on the side in purple marker. That little girl used to think I could fix anything, and somewhere along the way, she forgot. But maybe, just maybe, I could remind her. Over the next few days, I reviewed every contract, every wire confirmation, every note of due diligence. I wanted no cracks, no mistakes. I read through the debt schedules, supplier agreements, and HR compliance forms until my eyes blurred. Revenge wasn't just about emotion. It was about precision. At night, I walked the hallways of my hotels. The staff greeted me with quiet respect. Not the forced kind that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from seeing the boss working beside them. I liked that. It grounded me. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke early. The city outside was still half asleep, the sky a pale grey. I ironed a plain shirt, packed a modest bottle of wine, and got into the same rental car I'd been using for months. I could have arrived in a chauffeured Mercedes, but that would have ruined the surprise. When I reached Emily's house, the air smelled like cinnamon and roasting turkey. She opened the door with a surprised smile. "Dad, you're early." "I didn't want to get caught in traffic," I said. Ethan came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Daniel," he said, grinning, "just in time to carve the turkey." I smiled politely. "You seem to have that covered, Ethan." The dinner was déjà vu. The same long table, the same laughter that felt slightly too loud, the same carefully placed pity in every conversation. Ethan talked about his work again. His new promotion, the bonus, the European vacation they were planning. Emily nodded along as always. And me? I just listened. Then, halfway through dinner, Ethan raised his glass again. "Daniel, we were just talking about you." "Still searching for something stable." "Still exploring my options," I said calmly. He chuckled. "Well, you know the garage is still available if you ever need it." The room laughed. Again. That was my cue. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a small remote control, and pointed it toward the living room TV. "Actually, there's something I think you'll want to see," I said. The room went quiet. Emily frowned. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Just watch," I said. The television flickered on, and Channel 7 News filled the screen. The anchor's voice was calm and professional. "Good evening. Tonight's top story. Regional businessman Daniel Morris has finalized his acquisition of Riverton Hospitality Group in a deal valued at over $10 million, making him one of the largest independent hotel owners in the state. The photo on screen showed me shaking hands with the former chairman of Riverton, both of us smiling for the camera. The room fell completely silent. Ethan's fork froze mid-air. Emily's eyes widened. Noah looked back and forth between us, confused. "Grandpa, that's you!" he said. The anchor continued. "The acquisition includes 15 properties across 3 states, including the historic Riverton Greens Country Club, known for hosting high-profile events and weddings." Emily's hand went to her mouth. She didn't need to say it. I saw it in her eyes. "That was her wedding venue. I turned off the TV. I bought that one last month," I said softly. "Didn't even realize it until I saw the chandelier." No one spoke. Ethan finally managed a strangled laugh. "You never said anything. You never asked," I said. "You all assumed you knew who I was. You built a version of me in your heads, and you preferred that one." The struggling, broken Daniel. "It made you feel better about yourselves." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I shook my head gently. "Don't be sorry. Be honest with yourself. I didn't need your pity. I just needed your respect." I stood up, set the remote down, and picked up my coat. Thank you for dinner. It was delicious. Dad, please don't leave like this, Emily said, her voice trembling. I'm not angry, I told her. I'm just finished pretending. I walked to the door, opened it and stepped outside into the cool November night. Behind me, I heard her crying quietly and Ethan whispering something to her, probably trying to make sense of what just happened. The cold air hit my face as I walked to the car. I looked up at the stars and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not triumph, not gloating, just peace. They finally knew the truth. And for once, I didn't need to say a single word to prove it. As I drove back toward the Grandview Plaza, the radio played softly, holiday music, cheerful and warm. I turned the volume up, just enough to drown out the echoes of the past. When I reached the hotel, the night manager smiled. Good evening, Mr. Morris. How was dinner? I smiled back. Productive, and it was. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, calm, and undeniable. The truth doesn't need a punchline. It just needs the right timing. 6 months passed after that Thanksgiving night. In that time, the story of my acquisitions spread far beyond local news. Business journals ran features about the self-made man who rebuilt his empire from the ground up. Investors wanted meetings. Bankers returned my calls faster than I could answer them. And my company, Morris Hospitality Holdings, was now a respected name in the regional hotel industry. But the victory wasn't about headlines or money. It was about silence, the kind that comes after years of being underestimated. I started every morning the same way: black coffee, sunrise over the city, and a moment of gratitude that I'd made it through the storm. One morning, as I reviewed expansion proposals for 3 new properties, Patricia, my CFO, walked in with her usual calm efficiency. "Congratulations," she said, setting a folder on my desk. The Milwaukee bid was accepted. "That makes hotel number 18. 18, I repeated with a small smile. "I still remember when I could barely fill 12 rooms. Patricia smiled back. "You've come a long way, Mr. Morris." I nodded. "We both have." After she left, I glanced at my phone. There were unread messages, some from investors, some from reporters, but one stood out. It was from Emily. "Emily, Dad, Noah has a baseball game this Saturday. It would mean a lot if you came." I stared at that message for a long time. In the months after Thanksgiving, Emily had been reaching out more often. There were small attempts at conversation, texts, invitations, little gestures that told me she was trying. The guilt in her voice had faded into something quieter, something real. I showed up that Saturday, standing near the chain-link fence as Noah ran across the field in his bright blue uniform. When he spotted me, his face lit up. "Grandpa, you came!" I waved, smiling. "Wouldn't miss it, champ." For the first time in years, being around them didn't sting. It felt settled, like a wound that had finally closed, even if the scar remained. After the game, Emily walked over, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You still like it black, right?" I nodded, taking the cup. "Always." She hesitated, then said, "I can't stop thinking about that night. The Thanksgiving dinner. I can't believe I didn't see what was happening. Who you really were." I looked at her carefully. "You saw what you wanted to see. Everyone does. I didn't correct you because I needed to build this without anyone's help or their approval." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong to let him treat you that way." I shook my head. "No, you were scared to lose the comfort you'd built." "I understand." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Can we start over?" I smiled softly. "We can start honest. That's better than starting over." As we talked, Noah ran up holding his glove. "Grandpa, did you see my hit?" "I did," I said proudly. "Straight into left field. That was perfect form." He grinned wide, showing the little gap in his teeth. "Mom says you have a hotel with a big pool. Can we go there sometime?" I chuckled. "If your mom says yes, I'll show you the biggest pool you've ever seen." It was strange how the smallest things could heal the biggest hurts. A few weeks later, I was in my office when my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Morris, your 11 o'clock is here." I checked my calendar. The name made me pause. Send him in, I said quietly. Ethan walked in wearing a navy suit that looked just a bit too tight around the shoulders. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. His usual swagger had vanished. "Daniel," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you for seeing me." I gestured for him to sit. "Coffee?" "Please." I poured 2 cups and handed him one. His hands trembled slightly. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, "for everything I said, everything I did. I was arrogant. I thought I had it all figured out. Turns out I didn't." I leaned back, watching him carefully. "You lost your job." He looked surprised. "How did you—" "I read the industry reports," I said simply. "Your firm's been downsizing for months. You were in middle management. The math wasn't in your favor." He nodded slowly. "You're right. They let me go last month. I've been trying to find something, but it's tough. I was hoping maybe there might be a position here. I know hospitality accounting. I could help." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I looked at him, not with anger, but with the kind of distance that comes from seeing someone clearly for the first time. "Ethan," I said quietly, "we do have an opening. Senior accountant. You'd report to Patricia, not me. 6-month probation, performance-based review. No special treatment. Are you sure you can handle that?" He nodded. "Yes, I need this, and I need to make things right." "Good," I said, standing. "Then you start Monday. Salary is $65,000 to begin." He looked stunned. "Thank you, Daniel. I won't let you down." "See that you don't," I said, extending my hand. As he left, I turned toward the window. Below, the city buzzed with life. Cars, people, possibilities. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. "Lunch next week? I'll pick the place." Me, "I'll choose." "There's somewhere I'd like to take you." That somewhere was the Riverton Greens Country Club, the same place where she'd gotten married without inviting me. When we met there the following Tuesday, the staff greeted me with warmth. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morris," the hostess said. "Your table is ready." Emily's eyes widened as she looked around the elegant dining room. "You own this place," she whispered. I smiled. "I do. It's one of my favorites." We ordered lunch, and for the first time the conversation was light. No tension, no guilt. Just 2 people trying to find their way back. At one point, Emily looked around and said softly, "I used to think this place was out of reach for us. That's why I didn't tell you about the wedding. I didn't want you to feel lesser." I shook my head. "You didn't need to protect me, Emily. I was never poor. I was just rebuilding. There's a difference." She reached across the table, her voice gentle. "You're right. And I'm proud of you, Dad. For a man who'd spent years pretending not to need anyone's approval, those words still meant something." After lunch, I drove to Noah's baseball practice. He waved when he saw me, running across the field with his glove in hand. "Grandpa, watch this one." I laughed, leaning on the fence. "Let's see it, kiddo." When he hit the ball and grinned up at me, something clicked inside me. That moment, simple, honest, and free of pride, was worth more than every deal I'd ever closed. People ask me sometimes if revenge feels good. The truth? It's satisfying, but not for the reason they think. It's not about payback, it's about peace. It's about proving to yourself that you were never what they said you were. As I drove home that evening, the city lights shimmered against the windows of my car. The world outside had changed, but the man behind the wheel had too. I parked beneath the Grandview Plaza, my hotel, my home. As the elevator carried me to the penthouse, I thought about the years of silence, the laughter, the humiliation, and the long nights spent fixing leaky pipes in that first motel. All of it had led here. When the doors opened, I stepped into my suite and looked out over the skyline. The same skyline that used to make me feel small now felt like it belonged to me. Revenge hadn't just given me back my pride, it had given me clarity. And as I looked down at the city I'd rebuilt myself into, I smiled quietly and whispered, "Sometimes silence builds the strongest walls." Then I turned off the lights, and for the first time in years, I slept without a single thought of what anyone else thought of me. A few weeks later, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, the morning sun spilling through the glass, casting gold over the skyline. The city hummed below, a quiet rhythm of movement and ambition. It felt different now. Not louder, not grander, just steadier. I'd built something real, something that could stand on its own, and for once, I didn't feel like I needed to prove it to anyone. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Patricia, my CFO. Milwaukee Hotel officially operational. Staff onboarding complete. We're now at 18 properties total. I smiled. 18. From one failing roadside motel with 12 rooms to 18 thriving properties across 3 states. I sent her a quick reply. Excellent work. Let's set a meeting for next week. Time to talk about expansion west. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I thought about the past few months. Emily had kept her promise. She'd been present. Small texts, random calls, coffee invitations. No grand gestures, no forced apologies. Just consistency. The kind of care that doesn't need to be loud to be real. And Ethan, he'd been working quietly under Patricia. At first, everyone in the accounting department walked on eggshells around him, whispering about the boss's son-in-law. But Ethan earned his place. He came in early, stayed late, never asked for favors. Patricia told me privately that he was efficient, humble, and respectful. People can change if they've been stripped of all the illusions that made them arrogant in the first place. Still, I kept my distance. I didn't want friendship or even approval. I just wanted boundaries. One Friday afternoon, Patricia knocked on my office door. "Mr. Morris," she said softly, "Ethan wanted to speak with you. He said he'd wait until you were free." "Send him in," I said. He entered, nervous but composed. His suit fit better this time. His expression was calm, almost grateful. "Daniel," he said, "I wanted to thank you again for giving me a chance. I didn't deserve it. I know that." I leaned back in my chair. "You earned your position. I didn't give you anything." He nodded slowly. "I still think about that night. What I said, the things I did. You didn't humiliate me when you had the chance. You could have crushed me in front of everyone, but you didn't. I didn't need to," I said. "The truth does that on its own." He looked down, fidgeting with his tie. "I used to think success was about being the loudest in the room. Now I know it's about being the calmest." That caught me off guard. It wasn't a rehearsed apology. It was reflection. "Keep that lesson close," I told him. "It'll take you further than ambition ever will." When he left, I sat in silence for a while. The office was still. The only sound, the faint buzz of the city below. I realized then that the revenge part of the story had ended months ago. What remained was perspective. That night, I drove out of the city and headed toward one of my mountain resorts. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The drive took 4 hours, winding roads through pine forests and fading sunlight. When I arrived, the property was quiet. Off-season, only a few guests checking in. The front desk clerk smiled when she saw me. "Welcome back, Mr. Morris." "Good to be here," I said. I spent the evening walking through the hallways. Running my fingers along the polished wood rails, I'd once sanded myself when I was still learning what ownership really meant. The smell of pine and fresh linen brought back everything. The exhaustion, the uncertainty, the stubborn hope that somehow it would all be worth it. At midnight, I sat on the deck overlooking the valley. The stars looked close enough to touch. I thought about my life, the mistakes, the humiliation, the rebuilding, and the peace that followed. I realized that revenge was never really about hurting anyone else. It was about reclaiming the version of yourself they tried to erase. When you lose everything, you meet your truest self. And if you're patient enough, you build something that no one can take away again. The next morning, I woke early and drove back to the city. I had lunch scheduled with Emily at noon. I chose the same restaurant at Riverton Greens, the one that used to represent everything I wasn't invited to be part of. When she arrived, she looked happy, calm in a way I hadn't seen for years. We talked about Noah's school, his grades, his dream of becoming a pilot. She laughed when I told her I'd buy him his first model plane. "You'll spoil him," she said. "I didn't get the chance to spoil you," I replied, smiling. After lunch, she looked at me thoughtfully. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy now?" I thought about that for a long moment. The question seemed simple, but it wasn't. Happiness wasn't something I'd thought about in years. "I'm content," I said finally. "Happiness fades. Contentment stays." She nodded slowly, understanding. "Then I'm happy for you." When we walked out of the restaurant, I looked up at the building's sign, Riverton Greens Country Club. The same place that once symbolized exclusion now represented balance. I had no bitterness left, only perspective. That evening I went to Noah's baseball practice again. He spotted me immediately, waving his glove in the air. "Grandpa, watch this!" He hit the ball cleanly, the sound echoing through the field. I cheered louder than anyone. After the game, as we walked to the parking lot, Noah asked, "Grandpa, were you ever scared when you didn't have anything?" I smiled. "Every single day. But fear isn't bad, Noah. It just reminds you that you're still alive. What matters is what you do with it." He looked thoughtful. "So, you built hotels instead of being scared?" I laughed softly. "Something like that." Later that night, I stood once more by the window of my penthouse, watching the city lights shimmer across the horizon. Revenge had done its job. It restored what was taken from me. But forgiveness, that's what kept me whole. I forgave them all, not because they deserved it, but because I did. I finished my drink, turned off the lights, and whispered into the quiet room. Sometimes the greatest revenge is peace, and as the city glowed below, I realized I wasn't just the man who'd been underestimated. I was the man who'd rebuilt his life brick by brick in silence, and finally, that silence was enough. A year passed. I didn't even notice it at first. Time, once heavy with memories and regret, now moved lightly, like air flowing through open doors. Life had become steady, quiet, beautifully predictable. My hotels ran smoothly. The teams I'd built were loyal, professional, and efficient. Patricia now managed most of the operations. She'd grown into a force of nature, firm but fair. I no longer needed to micromanage every contract or invoice. I'd earned the right to breathe. One crisp autumn morning, I woke before sunrise, brewed my coffee, and stood by the window overlooking the skyline. The city was still dark, dotted with tiny golden lights that looked like constellations on the ground. For years, I'd looked at this view and seen ambition. Now I saw balance. I picked up my phone and scrolled through messages. One was from Emily. "Dad, Noah won his first school essay contest." "He wrote about you," I smiled and opened the attached photo. It was a piece of lined paper with the title, "My Grandpa Who Never Gave Up." He had written about how I fixed old hotels, worked hard, and taught him that quiet people can be strong too. He even drew a little stick figure of me, holding a wrench next to a tall building. I sat down, holding the phone a little tighter than usual. There was a lump in my throat that no amount of success had ever caused before. That drawing, simple and innocent, was everything I'd been working toward. Not recognition from the world, not respect from those who once mocked me, just that. A child who saw me clearly. Later that week I met Emily and Noah for lunch. We sat outdoors, the sun warm but gentle. Ethan joined us too, different now, calmer, softer. He still worked at the company, and Patricia said he'd become one of her most dependable managers. During lunch, Noah was full of energy, talking about his school, his essay, his friends. "Mom says we might go on a trip for Christmas," he said excitedly. Ethan nodded. "We're thinking about taking him to see snow for the first time." "Good idea," I said. "There's a resort 2 hours north. You'll like it." "I own that one." They laughed. Not awkwardly this time. Genuinely. After lunch, Ethan stayed behind while Emily took Noah to the restroom. He looked at me seriously. "Daniel," he said, "I don't know if I'll ever deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I've spent this year trying to become someone my son can be proud of. You taught me that respect has to be earned, not demanded." I looked at him for a long moment. "Ethan, I forgave you the moment I realized you'd stopped pretending. People make mistakes. What matters is what they do after." He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you," Emily returned, then smiling. "Dad, you're quiet again. That means you're thinking about work, doesn't it?" I shook my head. "Not work this time. Just life." As they left, Noah ran back and hugged me. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to be like you." I laughed softly. Then learn patience, Noah. That's where real strength comes from. He grinned and waved before climbing into the car. That night, back at the penthouse, I took out a small wooden box from the drawer. Inside were a few keepsakes, a photo of Emily as a child, my first motel key, a yellowed invoice from the day I bought it, and now Noah's essay. I placed it carefully on top. Sometimes the evidence of a life well lived doesn't come in contracts or wire transfers. It comes in a child's handwriting and a family sitting together without bitterness. A few days later, Patricia called. "We've had an offer from a national chain, Daniel. They want to buy Morris Hospitality outright." I didn't answer right away. "How much?" I asked. "43 million, I chuckled quietly. More than I ever dreamed. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "We're not done growing." That night I stood on my balcony again. The wind was cold but calm, carrying the faint sound of traffic and city life. I'd look down at the lights, remembering every road that led me here, the motel nights, the humiliation, the silence, the triumph, and finally, peace. In the end, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my name, and my family. Revenge got me here, but peace kept me here, and as I watched the sunrise over the city I'd once thought would swallow me whole, I whispered one final truth to myself. I didn't just rebuild my business. I rebuilt my life. Then I turned away from the window, poured myself a cup of coffee, and smiled because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to see my worth. I already knew it. A few months later, winter settled over the city. The air turned crisp, the streets glowed with holiday lights, and people rushed through the cold, carrying coffee cups and shopping bags. I'd always loved this time of year, not because of the festivities, but because winter reminds you who you really are. It strips away the noise, the chatter, and the pretending. You either learn to endure the cold, or you grow strong enough to create your own warmth. That December morning, I sat in my office, sipping coffee as the snow drifted outside the tall glass windows. Patricia stepped in holding a folder. "The holiday bonuses have been approved," she said. "You want to sign off?" I smiled. "Of course. Make sure the night staff gets the same percentage as management," she nodded. "You've always been fair, Daniel." I looked at her. "Fairness isn't charity, Patricia. It's gratitude with structure." She smiled softly, understanding. "Merry Christmas, boss." "Merry Christmas, Patricia." After she left, I turned my chair toward the window. Below, one of my hotels had strung garlands and lights across the lobby doors. Guests passed through laughing, carrying gifts. I felt an odd sense of calm watching them. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video message from Emily. It was Noah, wearing a Santa hat that was too big for his head, sitting in front of their Christmas tree. "Hi, Grandpa. We're having hot chocolate. Mom says maybe you can come tomorrow and help us decorate. We saved the star for you. I watched the video twice." Then I leaned back in my chair and smiled. The man who'd once sat alone in a motel, fixing leaking sinks, now had everything he'd ever wanted. Not the money, not the power, but the invitation. A genuine one. The next evening I drove to Emily's house. Snow blanketed the lawns, soft and untouched. When I knocked on the door, Noah came running. "You came? Mum said you might not, but I told her you'd never miss Christmas." I laughed. "You were right, kiddo." Inside, the living room glowed with warm light. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Emily handed me a mug of hot chocolate. Ethan stood beside her, quiet, respectful. The air between us was no longer strained, just steady, normal. We decorated the tree together. Noah placed small ornaments on the lower branches, humming Christmas songs off-key. Emily adjusted the tinsel, while Ethan fixed the string lights. When the tree was nearly done, Noah handed me the golden star. "Grandpa," he said softly, "you should put it on." "You're the tallest." I smiled and lifted him onto my shoulders. He stretched out his small hands and placed the star on top. Everyone clapped. The lights reflected in his eyes like tiny suns. For a moment, I just stood there, my grandson on my shoulders, my daughter smiling beside me, her husband watching quietly. Humbled but changed. And I realized this was it. This was the real ending. Not the press releases, not the deals, not the revenge. This was what I'd been building toward without even knowing it. Later that night, after Noah fell asleep, Emily and I sat by the fire. She looked at me for a long time before saying, "You know, I used to think success was about money, about security, but now I think it's about peace." "You have that, don't you?" I nodded. "I do. It took me too long to understand that peace isn't something you buy. It's something you build and then protect." She reached out, resting her hand on mine. "I'm proud of you, Dad," I smiled. "And I'm proud of you, too. You found your way back." The fire crackled softly. Snow fell outside, coating the world in quiet. When I drove home that night, the roads were empty, the city lights glowing faintly through the falling snow. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the silence, the years of work, and the long road to forgiveness. It all made sense now. Every step, every scar, every lonely night in that motel. It was never just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that no one, not even life itself, could keep me down if I refused to stay there. When I reached the Grandview Plaza, I parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened to the familiar quiet of my penthouse. I set my keys down, walked to the window, and watched the snow fall over the city I had rebuilt myself into. In the reflection of the glass, I didn't see the broken man who'd once been laughed at. I saw a builder, a father, a grandfather, a man who'd lost everything and found peace in the ruins. I lifted my glass of wine to the skyline and whispered softly, "To the ones who doubted me, thank you. You built the silence I needed." And then, with a calm heart and a small smile, I turned off the lights. The city below shimmered like a promise kept. I finally had everything I needed. Not revenge, not victory, just peace, and the love that waited patiently for me to come home to it. A few weeks after Christmas, I found myself walking through the lobby of one of my smaller hotels, a cozy mountain property that still smelled of cedar and fresh paint. The fireplace roared in the corner, and the front desk clerk, a young man named Leo, was helping a family check in. He didn't notice me right away, which I liked. He was kind, patient, and good at his job, exactly the kind of person I'd once been when no one was looking. When he finally turned and saw me, his eyes widened. "Mr. Morris, I didn't realize you were visiting today." "Just passing through," I said with a smile. "You're doing great work, Leo. Keep that up." As I walked toward the door, he said, "Sir, I've been meaning to ask, how did you do it? How did you come back after losing everything?" I stopped and thought about that for a moment. "By staying quiet when I wanted to shout," I said, "and by remembering that revenge doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be complete." He nodded slowly, as if trying to memorize the words. Outside, snow crunched under my shoes. The air was cold but clean, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to rush anywhere. When you're young, you chase success. You run after it like it's the only thing that matters. But as you grow older, you realize success is just a room you decorate with peace, family, and self-respect. Without those things, it's empty. I climbed into my car and started the engine. The radio was playing softly, an old song from the 80s I hadn't heard in years. It made me smile. Funny how music can pull you through time, taking you back to the person you used to be. I drove slowly down the mountain road, watching sunlight break through the clouds. Somewhere halfway down, I pulled over at a scenic overlook, the same spot I'd stopped at years ago, back when I was still fighting to believe in myself again. I remembered sitting there with nothing but debt, loneliness, and a map of dreams that felt impossible. Back then, I promised myself one thing, that if I ever rebuilt my life, I'd never let success harden me. I'd stay kind, grounded, and grateful. And somehow, through every trial, I kept that promise. I got out of the car, stepped to the railing, and looked down at the valley below. The town stretched out quietly, the roofs dusted with snow. Somewhere in that town, families were laughing, hotels were full, Lights were glowing, all part of the world I'd helped shape, without anyone realizing how much of myself I'd poured into it. For the first time, I whispered a thank you, not to fate, not to luck, but to every version of myself that didn't give up. The man who'd scrubbed motel floors, the one who'd eaten cold soup in empty rooms, the one who'd sat outside his daughter's wedding. Heartbroken but still determined, all of them had led me here. When I finally drove back to the city, the roads were clear and the sun was low, painting the skyline in gold. The Grand View Plaza shimmered in the distance, my flagship, my monument to quiet perseverance. That evening, I walked through the lobby like any other guest. People passed by without realizing who I was, and I liked it that way. I watched couples check in, kids laugh near the fountain, staff moving efficiently with practiced smiles. I sat in one of the leather chairs near the window, sipping coffee, blending into the rhythm of the place. And I realized something simple yet profound. I wasn't just the owner of these walls. I was part of the lives that moved through them. A young couple nearby was arguing gently about something silly, whether to get dessert before dinner. The man noticed me watching and smiled awkwardly. "Sorry, sir, we're being loud." I waved a hand. "No need to apologize. Love's supposed to make a little noise." They laughed. And I saw in them a reflection of who I'd once been, with all the pride, the mistakes, the love, and the lessons still waiting to be learned. When I finally stood to leave, I took one last look around the lobby. My empire, my silence, my peace, and I knew the time was coming soon to pass it on, to let someone else lead, someone younger, maybe even my grandson one day. Because real legacy isn't money, it's values. It's the echo of the example you leave behind. As I stepped out into the evening air, the city lights shimmered below like tiny promises. I pulled my coat tighter, breathed in the cold, and smiled to myself. People spend their whole lives trying to prove their worth to others. I spent mine learning that the only person who ever needed convincing was me. So if you're listening right now, if someone ever made you feel small, invisible, or unworthy, remember this: silence is power. Consistency is revenge, and peace. Peace is victory, because when the world laughs at you, the best sound you can ever make is the sound of success whispering back. And that, I said quietly to myself, watching the city glow beneath me, is how I got everything they said I'd never have, and kept my soul in the process.